Hello, and welcome back to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. And I'm here with my friends and colleagues,
David Kennedy.
And Red Keating.
And I'm Julie Brown. And today we have a special guest that we are delighted to welcome to the podcast, Samantha Rose. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you for having me.
So, Samantha, you shared your bio with me, which is very impressive. And I'm just going to read it, and then we're going to jump in to discuss the book and your memoir that brings you here to have this conversation with us today. So Samantha Rose is an Emmy award-winning television producer and a New York Times, USA Today, and internationally best-selling ghostwriter of nearly 20 titles. Some of those titles have been selected as Reese's Book Club and Target bookmarked picks and featured in the Wall Street Journal, Oprah, and Harper's Bazaar. She is the principal of Yellow Sky Media, an editorial agency in Petaluma, California, and her newest release, Giving Up the Ghost, was awarded Best Memoir at the 2025 San Francisco Book Festival and is her first title written under her own name.
Wow.
Right?
That's
Impressive.
a great bio. That's very
I know.
impressive. Sam, I think we could start maybe by having you help us understand and our listeners understand what's a ghostwriter. I'm assuming it's not like you're Stephen King. You're not writing necessarily ghost stories or scary stories, but it's something different. Can you give us a sense of what is a ghostwriter?
I've actually had people ask me if that means I write paranormal books. And no, I don't. Although the one that we're going to talk about today has a ghost-like quality.
It does.
Exactly.
But a ghostwriter is someone who writes for other people. In just a general sense, this could be writing books or articles or blog posts or songs, I guess. People who write music for other people are ghostwriters in a sense. I have been a ghostwriter for almost 20 years, and I write exclusively nonfiction, full-length books for people. And I write them almost exclusively in first person. So I write in their voice as them. And it is kind of a strange job, but it works. It's an intimate relationship that I have with my clients for me to understand who they are and what story they want to tell. And it's pretty remarkable. I'm still kind of in awe that people trust in me to relay back onto the page their innermost thoughts and their stories.
I'm sitting here thinking, do you ever lose who you are? Because you're always in somebody else's story. There's a sense of, where's Samantha in all of this?
Well, that is a theme that emerges in my book, Giving Up the Ghost. I do have a realization that I had become a ghost, not only professionally doing this for 2 decades, but that I had become a ghost in my own life in many respects. And that part of the writing process of this book was forcing me out of the shadows and to reclaim my voice.
And so as a ghostwriter, that means we wouldn't know that you had written the book. It gets attributed to somebody else, like your name never appears?
I would say about 50% of the books I've written, I do have cover credit.
Okay.
And I'm always acknowledged, but I'm not. You wouldn't know that I had written it probably.
Yeah.
But people in publishing, they all know who works on books, and I get that question a lot, and it's just part of the gig that it's not my book really. I've helped someone birth it. But the stories or the content or the instruction belongs to them. And you just have to accept that going in.
But your new book, Giving Up the Ghost, is your story.
That's right.
Right. And what a story. Could you share with us, start us off, what is Giving Up the Ghost?
Giving Up the Ghost is a memoir that I wrote. It's been about 5 years. It takes place starting 5 years ago when my mother, Susan Swartz, who was a public-facing, well-known journalist in Northern California where I live, and a close confidant of mine. We were intimates. We were a very close mother-daughter duo. She died by suicide on a Tuesday morning, not many hours after she and I had had a normal-ish phone call. And so that's the inciting incident of the book. And I started working pretty quickly after that with a grief counselor who becomes a through line in the book, Rabbi B, who was the first really to encourage me to write the book, and I think has some of the best lines in the book. So he and I started having these weekly calls, and I would I would jot down a lot of what he was saying and a lot of what we were talking about. And those reflections and a lot of that dialogue ended up becoming a big, significant part of the book. And so it takes place over the first year after losing her, which was right at the onset of the pandemic lockdown. So the first part of the book is really my grief journey, trying to untangle a lot of the complicated questions that are left behind with a death like this, and then in that relationship with B. And then the book takes a pretty significant shift in the second part, which we can talk about, where I start having dreams about my mom, and she starts to answer some of these questions that I have. And those dream dialogues become really the backbone of the second part of the book.
Just to say a little more about your mother's and her death, it was a complete shock to you and your sisters.
Yeah.
You'd had contact with her that morning.
That's right. I mean, I think as I explore in the book, there were things we knew that she was struggling. Mm-hmm. But suicide is shocking, I think. It is. Always. And you do get these questions from very well-intentioned people, like, did you know? And did you know this was going to happen? And no, I don't think there's ever any knowing that something like this will happen, because it's such an inconceivable scenario. At least it was for me.
And I'm one of the reasons why I was excited about this podcast and having you here, Samantha, is that because as I read the book, and all three of us have worked with many, many cases of suicide surviving, and I hear those questions that you raise as questions that we have heard so many times. And it's the helpfulness because people in that think, as you know, think I must be crazy. Like I'm the only one that can deal with this. And yet the uniqueness of each story, such as yours, is really important and key. But there's some bigger issues like that search for answers, for meaning. And that's a big word I picked out of your struggle. Needing to know those things. And that can take a long time. That's not something that gets settled quickly with people.
Oh, well, no, it doesn't. It does take a long time. And I don't know that we can ever answer the questions. I felt like I got to an understanding eventually that made sense to me. And that was just going to have to be enough. But I did spend a lot of time in investigative mode as I write about trying to detective it out and going back and untangling the timeline and trying to figure out who she was with at this time and what she said here and there. And it can be crazy making. For me, I wanted to do that. My brain wanted to organize it and try to make sense of how did it all lead to where it led. And again, there are things that I don't think I'll ever know for sure. And I take some liberties in the book, especially in that second part where she and I are having conversations, and she answers some of these questions for me. I feel like she did. And I struggled a little bit with including that because I worried that some readers might find it too unbelievable, or there would be people who knew her who thought, how could you speak for her? But eventually I decided ultimately that they felt real and they felt true and it felt right and it was helping me heal. So I continued to do it.
Can you sort of speak to that sense that I got, you're reading that search for control in a situation where there's no control? I felt that as I was reading, the search for the answer was this search of how can I find control back and make this make sense?
I think that our human brain, that's just what we want to do. We want to make sense of it, and we want to. That's my sisters and I talked a lot about that. We went into our sort of type A organizational brain to give us a sense of control when we knew we really had lost it. I mean, we could not control what she ultimately did. That was she could only control that. But that I hear that with other people who have survived suicide, that's a very natural road to take initially, is to try to control an outcome that is clearly out of your control.
I love the fact that you guys made a whiteboard.
Yeah. Yeah, I love
There it
that.
was.
Yeah.
Here's all what we need to do. If we do all this, then we're doing something and
Well,
things are
it felt
happening.
like at least then you're doing something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You're doing something at a time when it feels just so chaotic.
right.
Suicide
Mhm.
is so disruptive and chaotic.
Mhm.
And so, my sisters and I, for those who haven't read the book, we immediately go into organizational mode. We have a whiteboard, we have a Google, document, and all the things that we think we need to take care of. And I guess that did give us a sense of, I don't know, some sense that we were moving forward through such a painful time.
Mhm.
And there are so many things, as you know, to do when
Mhm.
someone dies. And we had just lost my mother's husband, my stepfather. He had passed from cancer 3 months before she took her life. And so we already had been indoctrinated to this. We had already been through ordering a death certificate and meeting at the crematorium and some of these things that need to get done. And so we just kind of went into production mode, which a lot of people thought was a little premature. The day after she died, that we're
Mhm.
calling the county clerk and the tax attorney, but I think that's part of the shock, right?
It
How
is.
Mhm.
people
It
react to
is.
shock.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
people can't move, can't get out of bed. For us, it was how many things can we cross off the
Right.
list?
Right.
Mhm.
And both are good.
Yeah, exactly, David. And for me, it's like in the early part of the book when you're reading all of this, you can almost, as the reader, feel how hard your brains are working to just try to how do we restore some order? How do we restore some solid ground? Because it's like the earth has cracked beneath our feet, right? And it's like, where's the solid ground? And for you initially, the way I read it, it was like, oh, that whiteboard and the long list, and what can we start crossing off the list, and who can we start calling to get the death certificate, was like a way to find some solid ground, to create some order in a place where it's like a bomb just went off in our life. And there's a tiny little bit of order. And then on top of that, I also heard that in, as you said, that detective work that you were doing initially, trying to figure out her last hours and her last minutes and who did she speak to and what kind of state of mind she was in, trying to make some sense out of something that our brains are really not equipped to make sense out of.
Mhm.
Like we can't. And it takes a really long time to do that. So I thought as an author, you also just really captured kind of like the incredible work that the brain is doing in the aftermath of a death, and especially a sudden, unexpected death.
Thank you. I really wrote it as I tried to write it as raw and just as it was happening, as it felt, the overwhelm of it. And you nail it. You feel so untethered. That's how I felt,
Mm-hmm.
that I was grasping for something physical and tangible that I could hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide, at least, had never touched our family, and not even a couple steps removed. And so there was no context for how to deal with this. It was so foreign and it didn't make any sense. And so going through the motions of doing things like going down a list or making coffee or getting dressed and meeting with my sisters. Those are all things that I understood. They were familiar in an unfamiliar climate.
Often suicide can produce this disenfranchised grief because of attitudes towards suicide. And often people are reticent or hesitant to actually talk about the death as suicide just because of all of the pieces that get thrown in there. Did you and I was going to raise about your stepfather who or your mom's partner who died 3 months earlier, a totally different type of grief. And you could, that one's a public one you could talk about. He died of, medical reasons and everybody accepts that. Suicide carries a bit of edge with it with some people. And did you ever feel that disenfranchised a bit?
Definitely. I called him Close. He was a newspaper reporter, and everyone called him by his last name. He was Bob Close. And his death was shocking also in that he'd been sick. And so there was an inevitability, I guess, to him dying eventually from cancer. But he had been going through a really positive period where his numbers were good and his scans were good. And we all thought he had a lot longer to live. And then there was a domino effect of things that happened, and he died really suddenly. So his death was also shocking, but there was an acceptance to it that you're talking about that is different with suicide.
Mhm.
And people don't want to talk about it, or they're very uncomfortable. And we felt it right away. I mean, we were uncomfortable with it, and it's just treated differently. So it was really interesting to have those deaths so close to each other and to have such a different reaction from people. So we had thrown him a memorial service that was attended by upwards of 300 people. And we started talking about having a memorial for my mom. And it was complicated by COVID. So we weren't able to do it for another year. But I remember thinking at the time, like, she doesn't get one. He deserved one. She doesn't get one. I was so mad at her. There was a lot of anger that surfaced around her death that didn't surface around his. So there was the internal, how the family was relating to both deaths very differently. And then there's the larger community and how they relate to the both deaths very differently. So you're right.
Which is why we appreciate the book, because again, the telling of the story to normalize the reality of this experience of death, which is, far more common than people ever want to acknowledge. So it's important.
And I do want to say that I eventually got to a place where I I changed how I felt about that. My mom did deserve a memorial. just like he did. And she did deserve to be honored and respected, just like anyone else. But it took me a while to get there because of
Yeah.
a lot of the complicated feelings and rage. And I write about that quite a bit initially around how she left.
And that's a common phrase I would use with suicide survivors is that no one deserves to be remembered only by how they die. That's not fair. I mean,
Right.
how they die is true and it's important, but they are much more than that. And your mom was large. She was so large as I read that. But when suicide happens, that kind of takes the center stage, but it doesn't define her. That's not
That's
her
right.
definition.
Rabbi B explained to me at some point talking about grief, and that was suicide. He talked about the haunting of the how,
Hmm.
and the how, the details of the death, the
Hmm.
when it happened, the how it happened, that is its own grief, and it takes center
Hmm.
stage. It did for me for a long time. How she died and why and in what fashion. And it wasn't until much later that that grief was able to shift and I could just grieve her and grieve the loss of my mom. And that was its own different grief and almost harder, I think, because I finally was able to really miss her. And it was a different kind of grief.
It seemed to me that part of what you were working through initially was that rage and the anger, and that Rabbi B, this person that you had these weekly telephone conversations with, was a really important part of, allowing the anger, the rage to be there. One of the things we've talked about many times in episodes on this podcast is that part of the work of grief work is making space for all of it. And that includes something like, in this case, rage and anger. And I'm just wondering if you just want to say anything more about that, about how your rage came out, about how it was showing up, yeah, because that can also feel shocking or scary for us to experience ourselves as so angry.
It surprised me that I felt that way because I'm not a historically angry, ragey person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the things he did was invite everything to come forward. And it was one of the reasons I wanted to work with him,
Mm-hmm.
is that he did not seem repulsed or repelled or scared of any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And because, like we just talked about, a lot of people are scared by it. And I understand that and I respect that. But I really needed someone to just witness the mess. And he was the first person, I think, in my life to encourage me to give voice to my anger. And there's a section in the book where he's asking me, he says, if your anger could speak, what would it say? What would it say to your mom? And I remember thinking, oh, this feels really dangerous. And nice women are not supposed to talk about the things that make them angry. But there was this other part of me that was really kind of excited, actually, that he was welcoming it. And so we worked a lot on anger and what it is and giving it a channel, giving it somewhere to go so that it doesn't just stay bottled up in your body or comes out on other people, but to really find a way to channel it. And the way I did that was to channel it onto the page.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me so much. Writing out, and I do this almost in list form in the book, why I'm angry felt again like a scary exercise. I worried, if someone gonna read this? Oh my God. But then once I started doing it, it did physically release, I think, some of that out of my body.
I'm just going to go back to something David said there earlier, and I don't know if it belongs here, but in the middle of our discussion. But who was your mom? What David says, like it's we shouldn't be defined by how we die. We should be defined on our whole life, and it might be nice to just let people hear who was your mom and tell us a little bit about her.
Oh, thanks. Her name was Susan, and she was a journalist and a well-known columnist in Northern California. She wrote for the Press Democrat, was for a good amount of years a New York Times syndicated newspaper. So she was read by readers all over the country. She also was a radio personality and she wrote a couple plays. She was outspoken. She always had something to say. She was interesting and clever and funny and a bright light, really. She was, I talk about this like a sun, a very bright spirit, and which was some of why it was so shocking how she died. I've learned that there is no type, but she was never depressed. She was never diagnosed with any sort of mental illness. She was just a sharp, clever, witty, vital woman into her 70s. She was 76 when she passed, and she was in great physical health, and her mind was still very sharp. So her unraveling, a lot of that was in the shadows. She didn't disclose it. There were some indications, like I mentioned earlier, that she was compromised to some degree, but a lot of the family and a lot of friends attributed that to becoming a widow and being in grief. Mm-hmm. And also she'd retired not, within recent years. And so her identity of being a very public, well-known and popular person in the community, her public persona didn't match what eventually happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so that was some of the confusion. But to what you said earlier, she definitely would not want to be remembered as a suicide. She'd want to be remembered for her full life, which was full and interesting and exciting and notable, and witnessed by a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so part of my responsibility, I take as my responsibility in writing the book and portraying her beyond that fateful day, is to show the complexity of her life and to honor who she was in her entirety, which is what I think we all should be.
She deserves that, doesn't she?
Sure. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And as a reader, I can say you certainly can feel that.
Did that.
Like I can feel that as a woman too, because you spoke about that she was a strong feminist, and even as you in different places through the book described her, I was like, oh, I would have liked to have known this woman. Like, mm-hmm. You could almost feel like, oh, I would have noticed her in a room, right? If I walked into a room and she was there, you can just kind of feel like she had this vitality to her.
I'm so glad that comes through.
Yeah.
Some of the best feedback I've got from readers who didn't know her are comments. I've gotten emails from people who say, "Thank you for introducing me to your mom. Mm-hmm. She seemed like a really cool woman."
Yeah, she really did.
And I think, she mm-hmm. was very cool.
Samantha, at a certain point in the book shifts in your grief kind of processing. You have some dreams with your mom. And I'm wondering if you can start to walk us through that. And a caveat I just wanted to say, as I was reading your book, we were also preparing to record with another individual who studies grief dreams, Dr. Joshua Black in British Columbia. And so I just found it so fascinating to have this overlay, and listeners will get to hear that episode about what he studies about grief dreams And then I'm reading your book at the same time and going, and here you are talking about what his research is saying about grief dreams. So can you just share us a little bit about that? Because it seemed like your grief dreams became the portal to these conversations you started to have with your mom, which allowed your grief to continue being processed. If you would agree with that that's accurate.
I think so.
Yeah.
I should start by saying that I've always been a prolific dreamer. I dream almost every night and I often remember them, sometimes in great detail, sometimes just little snippets, but I've always dreamt. So for me to start dreaming about my mom was not surprising to me, but I had this dream that I write about where she kind of comes into my dream. She like drifts into my dream one night and she's got this swoop of beautiful, like silvery, I call it like celestial hair. And she smiles and says, "Do you like my hair?" And that's it. And then she kind of just winks and that's it. She's gone. But I woke up and I thought, oh my God, it felt so real because my mom was historically obsessed with her hair. And she was always talking about some new product she was going to get, or did she need to get a haircut? It was just always part of the conversation. And she made a joke about it, but her hair was a big topic. And for her to have found a solution to her hair problem on the other side or wherever she was would be absolutely something that she would want to tell me, and immediately. Right. And so I thought something might be happening here where she was communicating. And so mentally, or maybe I did it out loud, I don't remember, say to her, okay, if that was real, if that was you, then come back and we're going to talk about more than your hair next time. And so I invite her into my dreams and she starts appearing. I mean, I want to say my mom was in my dreams almost every night or every other night for over a year, like that, maybe even into the second year. And close would visit too. So I just started writing them down, which is my training as a writer, is you write things down. And I would write them as I would remember them. And then I started asking her to join me on the page, similar to how I ghostwrite, in that I am able to quiet my mind and really put my own voice on the back burner and ask a question of my client, or in this case, my mom, and wait for the answer. And when I hear the answer, I write it down. And so these dream dialogues start becoming, like I say, they take up the second half or the second part of the book. There's 3 parts. And we have conversations in real time, in present day. These aren't we're not rehashing old conversations. These are new conversations. And I believe that she was communicating things to me that I wanted answers to, that were important for her to still say. And I thought she'd always had a voice in life. She'd been rather outspoken in life. And I want to give her a voice in death as well. And now I'm really curious to hear what your guy would have to say about all this.
I know the hesitation that often you bring to that, but the reality is yeah, there's times I can't tell people what I've heard from clients because they wouldn't believe me if I told them. I believe it, and I know it's true. I know those experiences, and you're right. There's a hesitancy around what are people thinking. But that's to me, that's immaterial. These are, and I think your book presents these in such a powerful way, and they are real, they are true, and there's no sense of questioning from I don't think from any of us, but I'll speak for myself. for sure.
Well, they were true to me, and ultimately that was enough.
That's
And
enough.
they
Yep.
felt true to her.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
I talk about how easy it was and still is for me to hear my mother's voice.
Hmm.
She was the first voice I heard, and she and I spoke almost every single day. And I can hear her so clearly. I can recall her voice with such clarity that what I was hearing or what I could intuit, what she might say to a question, felt so real that it was impossible for me not to write it down.
Usually I hear from clients, the first line is, I don't know whether I can tell you this or not. They're testing the waters to see, right? Yeah.
But your dreams sort of nailed the nail on the head for a few things that I think Dr. Black speaks to us about, and that is you are a vivid dreamer and a regular dreamer, and then you remember them. And he says, we for folks like probably myself who doesn't really remember their dreams all that well, I'm probably having grief dreams, but because I don't remember a lot of my dreams, I'm not remembering that I'm having those. So folks that have vivid regular dreams and remember them are the ones that sort of are able to report having more grief dreams. And then I think the other piece he'd say is that they can have healing qualities. There are places where the difficult questions and feelings can be resolved. Not always, but sometimes. And so as you were talking, I'm going, oh my gosh, this is just so reflective of our conversation with Dr. Black and what he's finding in his research. So, yeah, you nailed it.
Great. I'm glad you're saying that and not.
Yeah. What are you talking about?
But this idea that it's not that for you, it felt like, if I could use this word, you tell me, I think you might even use this word in the book, is like it's a visitation with your mother. It's not a conjuring up of my imagination, imagining a conversation with your mother. It felt like a visit with your mother. And that is a very different thing. And I think when David says, when clients start to say, I don't know what you're going to think about this is what we hear. We hear this as grief counselors, right? That people will say there's a difference between, I was thinking about what my dad might say if this was happening versus I felt that I heard from my father, or in your case, like I had this conversation with my mother. And you could hear through reading your dialogue in those conversations how you started, that haunting of the how. You could hear that you were starting to work your way through that haunting. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The conversations with her helped me to understand, again, come to an understanding that made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And they helped me understand our relationship, our dynamic, and they started to help me understand myself. And that was, I think, the biggest surprise in the writing, which is the magic of writing, is that you think you're going down one avenue and it takes you often in a different direction. And I started to learn things with the help of Rabbi B about myself that I didn't know or I wasn't conscious of before she died.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is that ghost work of seeing how I'd been retreating and dimming myself and playing quiet, and that the story of how started out with how she died and around the suicide really evolved into a larger theme of the importance of us all stepping forward and speaking and finding our voice. And in this case, for me to say the really hard and scary thing out loud and to pick up where she left off. There, she was an outspoken woman, but when it came to her mental health, like I said, she withheld. So for me, it became important to carry that thread through, to say the hard things that maybe she couldn't say about her own life, and for me to start to say some of the hard stuff about my own life that I hadn't said either.
Maybe just to pick up on that a bit, Sims, I was intrigued to ask you around, since writing the book, which is it's only a year. It hasn't even been a year since it's publishing. What's the impact on you after having had that story not just written but published and out there? Has it impacted you in any way?
It has. It's been really exciting, actually. I mean, initially it was terrifying. It's one thing to think about writing a book, and then it's another to sit down and write it, and then to publish it and to know that people are going to read it can feel very daunting and scary.
Vulnerable.
And vulnerable, right? But that was
Yeah.
sort of the whole point of the book, is to be vulnerable and to be truthful and to, to step forward out of the shadows. So I was forcing myself to walk the talk, I think is the phrase. And so it's been great, honestly. I've met a lot of people who seem to be helped by it and seem to be encouraged to find their voice. I've gotten out from behind my computer and into the world again, which is an exciting thing for writers who spend a lot of their time behind closed doors and speaking to no one for long stretches of time. And I know my mom would be thrilled by it. I can feel her presence here and there, when I'm afraid or feeling nervous to go do a talk or to get on a podcast. I can hear her saying, "Oh, come on, let's do this." And so I'm kind of thrilled by being on the other side of it.
A process of finding yourself, right?
Yes.
What I did notice is that you were in that process through watching the threads through the book, and I'm going to ask was, even though things seem to be turning and you seem to be, not looking in the rearview mirror, maybe looking more straight ahead at the windshield, a sense of yearning tied through the whole book. That sense of, I think you call it sometimes a sneaker wave. Is that an ambushing? And that even when things were, when you were finding yourself and sort of moving through, there was always that sense of, but I need you. You left there. I got that sense of yearning. And I don't know if that's the right word, but that's the word I'm using. How is that for you now? Because I think that's important for people to know, even as time goes by and things maybe simmer down a little bit, the missing, it stays.
The missing continues. I think I've learned that about grief. I mean, I'd never known grief, and I'm still learning about it. And there's not an expiration date. So we know that it continues and it changes form. Some days it's louder than other days. But I miss my mom all the time. And I think maybe this year, since the book has come out, some of that has quelled a bit because I'm talking about her. And so she's very present still, and people are reading about her. And so the story of her and us is still very much alive and very present day. So I'm actually missing her less, I guess maybe less acutely than before, but I miss her all the time. And I expect that I'll miss her forever. And that's okay though, because that means to me that it was real and our relationship was deep and it was significant. And if I'm not missing her, then I've somehow gone numb, and I don't want to ever not feel the loss of her.
Well said. Very well said.
Yeah. I appreciated that thread. That I think sometimes people think grief is a goal. You get over it and everything's fine and you carry on, but that missing now is forever, right? Yeah, I appreciated that thread.
Yeah.
Samantha, before we started recording, we talked about that there are kind of different meanings to your title of your book, Giving Up the Ghost. Do you want to just take a moment and speak to some of that?
Sure. It's got several meanings to it. I read that the biblical, I guess, or maybe original meaning of giving up the ghost is for the spirit to lift out of the body, to leave the body, which is what happened to my mom. But then a more modern day definition of giving up the ghost is to stop doing something that is no longer working for you. And so I started to understand that about myself and the ghostwriting and being a ghost, that was no longer working for me to silence my own voice. So giving up the ghost of being a ghost and stepping out of the shadows and being more visible, that it took on that meaning. And then eventually, by the end of the book, I do come to a more compassionate place with my mom. I'm not going to say I guess I accept her death. It doesn't mean I'm okay with it. I still wish it would have gone a different way. But to give up her ghost, to release her from her suicide, from those last minutes. So all those meanings are sort of interwoven and layered throughout.
And how is motherhood for you now? I did enjoy that part of the book where on Mother's Day you realized, oh my God, I'm a mother too. And that then it was the carrying on of tradition, right? And that there's a chain, there's a history, there's a time, and we have our place in it, and that you are too a mother. So how's a mother for you? How's being a mother?
Being a mother is good. So my son is also a big character in the book. And he was 8 when this happened, and he's 8 turning 9, I guess, and he just turned 14.
Ooh.
So he is a different child than he was in those pages. And I'm very happy I captured him at that age. It was such a sweet time actually with us, that even though we were going through a very fraught time with losing her, and he was very close with his grandmother, so he'd lost someone significant as well. Even though that was hard, he and I don't know, we bonded in a new way, and in sort of a sweet and very intimate way during that time. COVID, he was home and we were shut in together. I was going through a divorce, so it was just he and I for many long hours and stretches of time together. And I write about some of that sweetness of being together and just being kind of silly. And he was so inquisitive and open and wanted to ask questions. And I extended the courtesy to him that Rabbi B had given to me, that nothing was off the table. We could talk about anything at any time. He could ask me the same question over and over again. I wanted him to feel like we don't keep secrets in this family. And we also get to feel however we want to feel. And so he helped me heal, and I hopefully helped him as well. As today, he is a teenager, and as teenagers go, he is a bit less talkative and forthcoming and not always sweet, but he's still my buddy.
You're right.
He will not admit to that, but he's still my buddy.
I know. I've had 2 of them, boys. And anyway, and I'm glad, Red, thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to say to you how thankful I was that you included him in this story, because I think on so many levels that was important for people to read, both people who are dealing with grief with children, and to hear your story there, but also to recognize how in our need to try to protect children, we often damage the opportunities of engaging in a way that's meaningful for both, for him, but also for you. And so I am thankful that you include him and his journey. And I'm sure as he gets and his life grows and it'll be something that he'll have. And that's the beauty of what you've written, is that it's there and it's a story for him that he will have for the rest of his life too. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for recognizing it.
Samantha, as we start to close our conversation, I just wanted to offer you the opportunity. Is there anything we didn't speak to that feels important, either from your book or just your story, or here we are after the book has been put out there in the world? Anything that you feel like, I really want people to hear this? Or
Well, I think this is probably something that you all talk about a lot and often, which is the importance of finding someone to witness your grief. And for me, it was finding a grief counselor, but it doesn't have to be a counselor or a therapist or a professional even. I don't think finding someone who can just sit with you and hold space for it and not try to fix it or turn it into something else other than what it is, I think is really important. And I'm so grateful that I found that person, because it made all the difference in the world. In fact, we were on a phone call today. We still talk every other week now, he and I, and the conversations and the topics have changed significantly since then. But he changed my life. And I hope that for everyone that is grieving or suffering loss of any kind, that they can find a hand in the dark to hold. And that would be my resounding advice.
yeah, so shout out to Rabbi B. Yeah, and to all the people who are that hand holder for people in the dark. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this book into the world and for this conversation. For people who might want to learn more about you and the book, do you want to just give a shout out to your webpage and where they can find you?
Sure. People who want to read the book, you can order it on Amazon, or your favorite online retailer should be carrying it. You can order it probably from your local indie, which is what I like to encourage people to support their local indie bookstores. And you can learn more about me at my website, which is yellowskymedia.com. And I'm on Instagram at Samantha Rose _writer.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough, dedicated to providing compassionate care and support to individuals and families facing life-limiting illness and loss. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio in Peterborough, Ontario. Special thanks to Paradise Garage for providing the music. Technical support is provided by Sean Heichert and audio engineering by Kevin Fleming. More episodes of What Now are available for free on most major podcast platforms. If you found value in our conversations, please support us by following the show, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing it with your friends and loved ones. If you'd like to support the essential work of Hospice Peterborough, please consider visiting hospicepeterborough.org/donate. Your contribution helps us continue to provide vital care and support. Until next time, may you find peace and comfort on your journey.